I did a lot of preparation for this. I haven't spoken on the book in a while, but just some background information. There was another book at the Texas Women that came out, was called Top Dogs and Their Pets. And all these are sold on Amazon, even the old ones from 1984. And I had a friend to help me, Richard Pruitt, and then after we shot about 30 of the 91 images, he decided he had enough. I mean, we worked together for 35 years or more, 40. So I had to give credit to him. And so I came up, actually, my writer, David Cedeno, who used to work at the Dallas Morning News, and one day I went over to his house for Thanksgiving, and he and his wife says, eating turkey or whatever, he goes, "Hey, Wu, why don't you do another book?" I go, "Oh, no, I don't have it in me anymore." And I said, "Why? And who's going to buy it?" He said, and his wife said, "David, you got some iconic images, and David's going to write it." So I had a lot of help. Layout, the publisher who published, I worked on 5 books of the Dallas Morning News on the Rangers, the Mavericks, and I said, "Can I have carte blanche on this book?" He goes, "Of course." So I had all the freedom, which was nice. So we actually came up with a simple design, and there are books in the back of the room. So I'm thankful for everything I have, and my parents raising me right, I hope. So let's start here. Let me get this right. So this was actually shot on November the 3rd, 1979, 3 years after I went to work for the Morning News. So back in the day, KKK was very dominant. I grew up in Port Arthur, Texas, and Jasper, and all these places in the backwoods of East Texas. I worked for the Beaumont Enterprise for one of my internships, and they sent me to a KK rally outside of Beaumont, and unfortunately I can't find the negatives. It was pretty amazing, and it caught my attention. And I grew up in a very religious family. My mom and dad were missionaries, and so I think my parents did something right with 5 kids. So I had 3 other Dallas Morning News photographers. We were covering the parade, and they had the KKK people marching down the Main Street, and all the protesters were across the street. So we're fortunate nothing bad happened, because they usually do. And so I told my fellow photographers, I said, "Look, I'll see you back at the paper." Back in those days, you process your film. Not anymore. So I got in my car, and I turned on my police scanner. First thing I heard was, we were returning Addie Barlow Frazier, who was the head KKK person, and she was their #1 recruiter, which is on the right-hand side. So I drove down there, and she got out of the police car and dropped her hood, and out of nowhere, let me find his name. Here we go, Lawrence Brewer. And he was just walking down the street, and he just stopped, bent over, and handed it to her, and I'm clicking. And when they left, go into the police station, I chased him down, and I said, "Hey, excuse me, can I get your name?" And he gave it to me. And I said, do you know who she is? And he said, "Yes, sir, I was at the parade." So he's all into not into the KKK, very aware. So I find it amazing. I mean, I guess a lot of people here would pick up the hood. I would. But the best question I think I ever asked anyone is said, "Lawrence, why did you do it?" And he didn't stop, he didn't do anything. He just said, or he introduced himself, he goes, "David, it's just the right thing to do." So that photograph ran on the front page of the Dallas Morning News. And he got letters to the editor praising us. I got a ton of letters before the internet, of course, that people were talking about it. And I won some awards about it, but I don't do photography for awards. I'm just trying to spread my experiences from all over the world so people back home here will see my vision. And most of the times I had a reporter with me. So, and by the way, if you have any questions, just raise your hand or something.
We'll take questions at the end.
I'm sorry?
We'll take questions at the end.
Okay, thank you. So, of course, this is the cover. And what was really hard is David invited me over his house. I told you that. And we started talking about it. And he says, David, you don't have to shoot any more photos. These are in your archives, the Dallas Morning News. And I had tens of thousands of images. Of course, some of them were digital, but then I went going through, I kept a lot of my tear sheets. And, 42 years, that stacks up to be a lot. And one of the tear sheets, or two of them back in the back, the Morning News was very grateful. And they gave me 3 pages in the entertainment section where the books are supposed to be. So that caught a lot of attention. And does anyone here know what the decisive moment is? And it could be anything. I'm going to show you some decisive moments. That's a decisive moment. I was hiding behind the steps in a tree because I didn't want the police or anyone to see me. So anyway, I managed to take the image. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about my first camera, the Leica, which is one of the best cameras made. And this is my father's camera. He got it during the war. And when he passed away in 1990, my mom gave it to me. And it's a film camera, of course. I'm dating myself here. But my first experience was on a family vacation. He always carried in this nice leather case. So I was bored, and we were in North Carolina seeing sights. So I took the camera out from under his seat, and I just started messing with it. And so my sister, who's 2 years older, by the time I got it out, she shouted out, "Dad, David's got your camera." And I could see his face in the rearview mirror. He said, "David, do me a favor and put that back." He goes, "I would teach you how to use it." So that was my platform. So this book consists of my very first day at work and my very last day at work. And I actually have bookends because first day at work was photographing the Cowboys coming to Love Field after they lost to Pittsburgh in Super Bowl 10. And I didn't know Coach Landry very well, but I ended up by photographing for the rest of his career. Great man, great family man. And so what's embarrassing, I only knew a few people, like Roger Staubach. Oh, they don't play football. So I was embarrassed because I had to, the TV was shooting something, I sort of sneak in off to the side, then I went on my own, but you always have to ask the names. I was embarrassed to ask them. Everyone thinks, "Oh, don't you know me? I'm Tony Hill," or whatever. So that was a learning experience. I know everybody in here, no one in here is under 20, right? 25? Does everyone know who they are?
Yes. It's Robin Carter.
Right?
That's Labor.
Ford is in the middle. Okay. So that was a women's convention in Houston. So I was there shooting for the paper, and I saw them up there, but I was just waiting. I had my camera just focused on them, and I waited like 30 minutes because someone was speaking, and then it changed to that. People say you're lucky, but I think people make their luck because I do a lot of preparation before I go and photograph somebody. Well, there was no preparation to do this. You just go and show up and shoot whatever you see. So, in fact, Lady Bird wanted some prints from that. At one time in my life, I wanted to be a president's photographer. I admired the guy that was doing it with Ford. His name was David Kennerly. And so over the years, that's what I wanted to do. So when President Bush, George W. Bush, became president, I've been friends with him since 1984, and his family, his father. I did a lot of private work for them. And if I photographed something really strong, I would ask him if I could run it in the newspaper the next day. Everyone that I met or did anything, I got their trust, which is the number one thing when you're a photographer, and dress appropriately. So that's my MO. Then Carter up in Arkansas, and they had the 1984 convention in Dallas, and I guess everyone knows who's standing behind her. Reagan, okay. So Jesse Jackson was running for president, and he was staying at the Anatole Hotel, but he took a day trip to go to Atlanta, and the paper sent me, and he was basically, he had one of these airplanes that had propellers, but he would land at the airport in Atlanta, and I'm sorry, I'm losing my throat here. So they told us when we left DFW that one of the engines is having trouble, but don't worry. When we land, we got to keep the right engine running the entire time, or they couldn't start it. So anyway, everything went fine. And he was a fantastic man. I really respect him. I'm getting to the Democrats here too. Gore and Clinton, when they were running for president and vice president, that was in Corsicana. That looks like to me a really old-time photo where everybody meet at the, it was like a little country store. And I had people looking at this, and they didn't care about them. They wanted to see what the comic books were. I chose this image because to compare the size. And I've never been on that plane, but I was on the one when Reagan was president for like 2 or 3 trips. The most impressive thing I saw was matches that they gave everyone with the White House on it. And I don't smoke. So in 1984, I getting to know George Bush at that time. And you see the window behind him, the glass, is a bulletproof glass. That's at the Historian Hotel, and that's where he stayed. And my first day in Houston, I saw him and asked him if I could follow him the entire convention. And he goes, sure. My nickname was Woozy. I'm told if he likes you, he gives you a nickname. So I said, can you make sure your staff and the detail Secret Service know who I am? Because when I say follow, I'm going to be with you all the time unless I need to step out of the room. And so that worked really well. And that, I still have a relationship with him as of today. Karl Rove, who you might see on Fox News on the right, he was intimidating. What's the word? He was trying to act like Karl Rove. He was trying to act like Ross Perot, because Ross had the ears, and he had a great voice to mimic his voice. And they all just started laughing. And once again, I'm inside where the press can't go, and I'm very competitive. This is another one of my favorite photos. In fact, Apple Computer used it without my permission in 2000. And I own the copyright to it because I wasn't working for the Morning News. I was I was working for him, but I had to get permission from the paper. And they saw, well, this could be good, where you can build trust with the Bush family. And that's exactly what happened. When it ran in the paper the next day, his secretary called me up. He says, "Hey, David, the president wants 20 16 by 20 color prints. And we have a lab printer that does all that." And he said, and they said, can you make that happen? So I did. And so anyway, Apple, it was copyrighted. They used it. One of my friends that works on the photo desk, they did a screenshot on Apple's site. And they said, "David, isn't that your image?" I said, "Yeah, I was the only one allowed." It's like if he's speaking here, I'm over here. Everybody else was here. So every now and then he would stick his head up. And that's how I made the photo. But after I talked to Apple, they said, I had a copyright attorney, and they said, well, we would give him one of those $750 computers that all different colors or whatever. And my lawyer said, no, that's not going to work. So anyway, in the meantime, I called the White House and talked to the guy who ran the website. And I said, "Sir, I'm going to record this conversation. I want Apple to hear it." He goes, "Go for it." So I said, Rick, or whatever his name was, and he said, "Did you give Apple permission to use this image?" He goes, "Of course not. We know that you own the copyright to it." And we told them, and they said, "Well, how can we get a copy of it?" They said, "Contact the photographer." So what happened is they didn't ask me for it. I don't know how they got it, but they got it. And so they had people voting on Gore or Bush on the internet. Every time I click, that was $750 in my favor. Because the average price sold for up to $2,000, the lowest price was $750. So my attorney and I sat down and said, "Hey, I wonder how many clicks they had." And I said, "Well, I'm going to go for everything here." So I called my son, who's a computer nerd at UT. I told him the deal. And he said, "I'll make you a list." I said, "By the way, get 2 of everything, 1 for you." So at first, she didn't want to do it, the Apple attorney. And I said, "Well, you might rethink this, because I'm willing to go to Washington, D.C. and have a press conference. How poor David got eaten alive by Goliath, and you stole my image. How do you think the public would take that?" Maybe some people wouldn't care, but they changed their tune, and that's when I ordered the computers. And I came back in from an assignment one day, and there's like 8 boxes, big computer boxes, sitting by my desk. And we had like 37 photographers then. And they all gathered around me and said, "Oh, is this for the department?" And no one, I didn't speak up. I just wanted to see what happened. And they go, "Hey, Wu, what is this?" I said, "Well, I sued Apple and settled for this. But if I really wanted to abuse my position as a photographer and owning the copyright, we would go into California, and they would have to show us the numbers on how many times it was clicked, then you multiply that by 750. It was a lot of money, but I said, one thing I need from you, Apple, I want you to write me an apology letter, and they did. So moving along here, this is when he's governor. They're standing in the backyard of the governor's mansion, and I remember lining up the Capitol in the background. But anyway, I stayed friends with them, for 1984 until today. In fact, they were great people. So how many people here remember the Delta 191 crash at DFW? Anyone? Okay. Yeah. Now I had to narrow down to 165 images from, I think I narrowed it down to 1,000. And then I had to narrow it down to 500. And then the publisher said, we don't care what you pick, but you can't go over 175 or 165 pages. So that definitely made the cut, because it looks like to me, like a dead bird or something. I don't know why. Why is that? Okay. It's supposed to be vertical, but anyway, this is down at the Ellis unit in Huntsville. And back in those days, they didn't have to sign a bunch of papers, and so somebody can interview them. So the warden says, David, go have fun. I'm going to put a guard with you. So I stayed there in the prison like 6 hours, and I had a heyday. I mean, the light was great, but then I saw this moment where he's shaving the guard with a big old razor. This one, Texas Headliner Photo of the Year, little girl had spina bifida, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, and she's at Children's Hospital, and the assignment was just to getting her therapy or whatever she was doing. And then I became really good friends with the hospital. They wanted me to shoot for them, but I was too busy. Baby Jessica, I know everyone here remembers her. That was in Midland, Texas. For the 42 years I've worked there, every day you think the paper has a lot of space and they had to fill it up. Sports was never a problem. Front page was good, but the Metro section, if they didn't have an assignment that day, back then they get it on the radio, and we all had numbers, had a Motorola radio, and they put out a calling, says, everyone that's listening to this, you need to go out and find a great feature picture. We have nothing for tomorrow's paper. So imagine that. And our circulation back then was like 700,000. So Pope Mobile, John Paul II, I think, and I'm told not one pope has been in front of the Alamo. This was the first. So I was trying to figure out in my preparations where to stand to get that image. So I had a map of the parade route. So the day before, I drove it, and then I saw, well, this is the spot. And I thought, well, I'm going to have this all by myself. Well, an hour before he drove by, there were like 50 photographers behind me. So I had to share. So if you look at these images, they were shot in Jerusalem. It's going to remind you a little bit of what's going on exactly today. I was with an AP photographer. We took the day off, and we were looking at the site where Jesus was born. And one religion says, no, he's born over here. But anyway, we were just enjoying a day off. Then all of a sudden you heard helicopters, you heard screaming, and one of the Israeli soldiers shot, not this guy, shot another guy, he's only 18, and killed him right in the street. So their law says you have to bury before sundown. So, of course, I stayed and no place to go, and followed them doing the burial. And I remember talking to my brothers, and I said, how did they keep up? How do they keep it up and still figure out a way how to live with all the violence around them? It's pretty scary, actually. It's probably the second most dangerous spot I've been in, except for Iraq. And I'll come to that in a minute. The Mexico City earthquake, I forgot how many people were killed. So I got a call, and they said, go to Love Hill, pack a suitcase. We're going to send someone to the airport to give you 40 more rolls of film. And so another photographer, Juan Garcia, he flew with Channel 8. And so we basically took off after one another. And so we were talking on the plane, who's going to get there first, because the pilots didn't know about what happened to the runways. And they had to go and get more fuel. I don't know why we didn't. But they still beat us there. It's a small point, but the other photographer and I have always been great friends, and we were betting who's going to get there first. But it was horrible conditions. It looks like Ukraine. It reminds me of Ukraine. And they filled the stadium up with, I think, over 10,000 people were killed. It could be more. And so they had all these baby coffins, and they're just walking in with them. And people asked me, what the heck is she doing? I said, well, I don't speak Spanish very well. I didn't ask for her name, because I just shooting, running, shooting, going everywhere. And I said, I actually did ask her. I said, what are you doing? And she understood a little bit of English. She goes, I'm trying to clean up. She goes, behind me is my house with other people. And she's got that little broom there in her school outfit. I don't know why this is so big. It's okay. I'm in Honduras, and I was there to cover the 4 nuns that were killed in El Salvador. Actually, this was El Salvador, forgive me. So a Newsweek photographer and I would get up every morning at 6:30. It's daylight, and we get in our car, and we just drive around the city, not to be morbid, but looking for situations like this to tell the story. There's actually a candle on the other side, but the government would just drive around and kill people for no reason. Oh, the curfew is at 7, but if they're on the street, bang, bang. So we're going to go to Honduras. I came up with the idea back in '83. I told the paper, I said, I'd like to go to a refugee camp in Central America and stay there for about a week or whatever. And they said, go, we get the Mexico City writer to go with you. So it's going to be hard to look at for maybe some of you, but there's just images everywhere I turned. And that little girl ended up by being on the cover of the special section. We ran it on Christmas Day in '88, I think. But it was nominated for the Pulitzer Prize. The whole the entire 20 images. You could enter up to 20. And so what the process is, all these images are coming in from all over the country. You can't be in another country. And it's very competitive, but there's 5 people sitting in a room going through them. I had 16 by 20 prints, and I'm told they put them, up on the wall somewhere, and everybody will go by and look at them. And it was very hard, I think, for people to look at. And this one broke my heart some way, it just did. I've covered a lot of hungry children in my profession, and some of them had really bloated stomachs because of being malnourished. Okay, this is another one of my favorite images. I have like 10, but the little girl holding her baby sister. And there was a quote underneath the picture written by Shakespeare, and I thought I wrote it down, but I didn't bring it. I couldn't find it. But that was called Children of War. This is my son, Sergeant Jake Wu. He was at Texas A&M. His grades began to slip because he was partying too much. And I went down, and when he came home, I said, hey, I'm thinking of asking the newspaper to let me go to Iraq to do a Father's Day story on you. He goes, I don't want my daddy with me. Like, who else is going to have their daddy with them? But anyway, a year later, I finally talked him into it. He goes, by the way, how are you going to get into Iraq? I said, let me take care of that. So he knew I was coming. So I called up President Bush and spoke to his right-hand person, who I knew very well. I told him everything. He goes, how soon do you want to go? I said, 2 weeks. I got to get all my shots. So Pete McGarren, have you heard that name? He's a congressman from Fort Worth. He's no longer a congressman. But he said, okay, we're going to get you over there in 2 weeks, and I will stay in touch with you. So I flew to Amsterdam, and then I took another plane from Amsterdam to Iraq, to Baghdad. And I sat there for a week, and I couldn't communicate with him. He didn't know what happened to me. And the reason they couldn't fly, because of all the sandstorms. You don't want to fly a helicopter in a sandstorm. So I gave a sergeant one of my cameras. I told him where to stand. I sort of preset everything so he wouldn't mess it up. He did a great job. I said, I'm going to knock on the door, and he has no idea I was coming. So I hat off to the sergeant that shot this. And it was, imagine one of your kids being in a war zone. Maybe you've experienced that. So I went on missions with him. And a lot of their missions is going like 40, 50 miles away, meeting with the elders to try to work out things that they need. I think they were just trying to, and leave them with a lot of money, just trying to get on their side. And I found it very interesting, this little boy carrying an AK-47. This is what it looks like at 5:30 in the morning. And by the way, it got up to 130 degrees most days. And my son made me drink, not water, it's what they give people when they're really dehydrated. It tastes like salt water. So he was in the tank division, and they didn't go out in the tanks when I was there. They went out in Humvees. So I've had people to come up, ask me my entire life, where did Wu come from? And I didn't want to tell a long, boring story. I said, I just cut it down and say, my grandfather was born in China, and left it at that. So I have a cousin that was doing a book, but she never finished it. To the left is my grandfather, and to the right his brother, and then the woman sitting down is their mom. So if you look at my book, when you get to the family, you're going to see this written in Chinese. This is my mom's mom. She was German, and they were all like wanting to be missionaries. They just grew up a very religious family, and they took a covered wagon. They heard that there was a Chinese community, and of course there's a lot of Chinese communities back then, that needed missionaries. So they went out there and being the missionaries that they came to be. This is my dad and my mom on their wedding day. And my dad was a minister and a missionary for, I can't see this, for like 40 years. And my brothers. The little guy on the right's a minister in Singapore. And that's my hippie haircut. My mom, I had the best parents anyone could have. I know y'all do too, but I never heard one curse word, nothing from them my entire life. And they gave me the support that I needed to, I think, develop my personality, my honesty. But I owe a lot to my parents. And that's my father. And he's half Chinese. And that's my daughter, and she's like 18 months there. Now she's 34 and works in England. So every Memorial Day, photographers had to choose a holiday that they would volunteer to work, or you would be told when to work. So I wanted Thanksgiving and Christmas off, so I always covered Memorial Day and 4th of July. They're pretty easy. But every time I went there, I would see images like this. And her husband was killed in the Persian War. And she was really emotional. Hugh Ainsworth, a very famous writer, he just recently passed away. I'll just turn this over. He's written so many books. He was considered an Oswald, JFK. He knew everything about them. He was at all 4 places. He was standing outside the book depository when President Kennedy was shot. He ran over to the Texas Theater, and he went into the theater, and that's where they captured Lee. And then he went to Oak Cliff. He heard about the motorcycle policeman. And so he knew a lot about the Kennedys. I mean, the Oswalds. Sorry. Larry, I'm trying to think. McMurtry, thank you. So the writer and I drove out, where does he live? I'm losing my mind. Not Lubbock, but he had all these libraries in this little town, and he wanted to sell all of his books, And so he told me to meet him at one of the cafes in downtown Archer City. So I met him, but we waited just outside because he was eating breakfast. And he came out, and I love the way he's dressed. He couldn't have staged it better. And he had some egg stain and luckily I saw it, and I didn't want to bring it to his attention, so I said, "Hey, Larry, do you mind if I adjust your suspenders?" And I just moved it over a little bit. Of course, we couldn't Photoshop ever. That's no matter what. And so he stood there, actually scouted it out. I have one light behind me. They're video lights, but they don't flash, and another one behind him. And I thought that was a great moment of him just sitting there and reading. He's going into one of his offices. I'd like his shirt tails out. He was selling Lonesome Dove for $750. He had 4 copies. And by the end, the writer called back later and said, yeah, he sold all 4 of them. So this is another one of those feature days where you go out and look for weather, whatever. And that's the Army Hotel in downtown Dallas. So Janet Leigh in the movie Psycho, that's a very famous shower scene recreated in the Dallas Morning News studio. We, the writer, what they told her, do not ask any questions about the movie Psycho. And I don't ask questions like that unless I needed to. So I arranged with our writer to bring her down. And the night before, I got both of my sons taking their turn because they both wanted to do it, one in color, one in black and white. So I had a Polaroid of it, and she came in and very pleasant, and I kept looking around for her handler. She wasn't there. So I thought, this is it. She knew what I was up to. I said, do you mind sitting here and doing this? She goes, no, Dave, I think it's very creative. Yeah, let's do it. So after I shot the roll, I'm shooting a House of Black camera, only 12 shots in it. I shot 12 black and white, then I went back to color. And about that time, the handler walked in and said, David, what are you doing? I said, I was just making a new friend here. And she knew what I was doing. Oh, by the way, someone gave her my address. She wrote me a letter asking for 2 prints. James Baker, during this time he was chief of staff. He has a huge ranch down in southwest Texas. And he would take Reagan hunting there. And I think he took Bush one time. And President Bush, 41, when he passed away in Houston, the hospital, James was right next to him holding his hand. They were that close. And I like it. I was lucky because I couldn't talk. Imagine me being in a blind, I couldn't talk. The turkey's in the photo in the shell. And what does he do? He sees it run in the paper. He goes, David, I need 2 16 by 20s. I'm going to put it behind my desk in the White House. So I try to make this short, because you know who those people are. So this is at SMU doing a debate before it started. And Time magazine photographer, Shelley Katz, is sitting next to me. He's very competitive. And he sat down and he said, I see what you're doing. And after he started talking to me, I said, Mrs. Bush, do you mind handing me my camera back? And she says, yeah, okay. So she handed the camera back to me, and Shelley, he says, well, give her the camera back. I said, no, I can't do that. He was very upset. This is really ironic. I shot this in 1984 at Bum Bright. He was the second owner of the Dallas Cowboys. So he sold the team to Jerry for $180 million. And I read something, the franchise is worth over $9 billion now. But what's ironic about this, 15 years later, I start working on my pep book. And there's my pep, but I couldn't use him because he had passed away, and I didn't think it was right. Have y'all eaten at any of the Lombardo's restaurants? There's one in Highland Park called 31. So he was going to be the high profile cover. Some of y'all been taking the paper for a while. I shot over 400 high profile covers. And so I knew him from photographing him in his restaurant, and I called him up. I said, hey, look, do you mind driving to Arlington at Home Depot? They got a great red bathtub on display, and can you get your chefs at some of your restaurants to boil spaghetti, but not your handmade spaghetti? And so they said they got up early and they brought in like 3 trash cans full of spaghetti, and the store hadn't opened yet. So I brought newspaper with me and I built it up so I wouldn't have to use so much spaghetti, and it filled the tub. And he was like really impressed. He goes, "You want me in there?" I said, "Yeah, you already agreed to it." He goes, "Well, my arm already sued. It won't hurt it." And he said, "Well, I got some wine I'm going to do a toast to." He was great. And by the time we were finished, that only took like 10 minutes. People behind me were taking photos of me shooting him. And then they asked him to stay in the tub for another minute so they could get the same shot. People are funny. So in the early 80s, I was out at Southwest Airlines covering Herb and Colleen, who just unfortunately just passed away. And Gary Kelly is no longer there. But I sort of became their personal photographer. And I worked my days off, and they would give me free airline tickets. They called them green passes, where I could fly anywhere for free. Even the luggage, well, bags fly free most of the time on Southwest. So it's just a series of photos. And Colleen, and she was really instrumental of the culture at Southwest Airlines. And she flew in 4 pilots and to stand on the wing. I mean, I saw this in my head as soon as I found out I was going to photograph her. And of course, I can ask people not to change their clothes or make the image where it wouldn't have been if I said something. She said, "That was my idea, David. I thought you'd like that." Would you know who he is? Gary Kelly. Every Halloween, they throw these big parties, and they have like 31 departments, and they're in competition for those green passes. If your skit wins, you get 4 green passes, and there's like 300 people in one of their departments. And I said, "Well, what do y'all do?" And Colleen said, "Well, they have a raffle to make it fair." So Gary, I have a whole series of photos of him dressing up and all sorts of things. He was ZZ Top. He was, after we shot, he had to go to the airport to fly to Austin. He kept the costume on, the beard, the hat, everything. He's walking through Love Field, and people were chasing him, asking him for his autograph. He just played with it. And this is a replica of the napkin that he and Mr. King, they were eating lunch somewhere, and that's when they came up with the idea of what cities to fly to. So 15 years ago, I was with him. I had a Sharpie, and I said, "Hey, do you mind repeating that map?" And he did. So, I think he owned the Black Eyed Peas. He owned so many restaurants, and the idea was to get him with all these vegetables. So he sent some of his people down to farmers market with that truck and bought everything they could see to fill the truck up. He has a hole in his shoe. I mean, he was sitting like that when I walked in, and he was going to get up. I said, "Do you mind waiting for a second?" So I shut that. Michael Dell of the great Dell Computers. He started Dell Computers, everyone probably knows, in Austin. But He's a very nice guy, nice family guy, and he donates so much of his money and computers to charity you would not believe. T.J. Jakes, Mr. Jakes. He's a very vibrant person. I used to go to his church because I'd love to hear him preach. So this is Shannon Wynn and Angus Wynn. So they knew they were posing for the high profile cover. They knew it was vertical. And I said, hey, I brought a rope with me because I went over there to check it out before I shot. I said, is there any way one of you can hang from your waist and be upside down? And his brother said, I'm not doing that. So he volunteered. And the thing is, he would turn red within like 4 seconds. So I'm shooting with a motor drive. Did anyone know where you shoot? Like I could shoot 10 frames per second. So guess what? He loved this picture so much that he wanted like 10 prints. I took care of it. So my good friend, Ross Perot Sr., what a hoot he was. And so I had him posed in front of this very famous painting.
Is that Norman Rockwell?
Behind him, thank you very much. Yes. So Mr. Perot and I became friends, and one time he called me up late at night. He said, David, I want you to come to Love Field and photograph my son, Ross Jr., returning from flying around the world in his helicopter. And he said, oh, by the way, don't bring anybody. So, sure enough, there's Ross now. And I would do family portraits of them through the years. That's how to get it on the good side of these people. This is a very famous flag. I forgot what it was. So have y'all heard of the Modern Art Museum in Fort Worth? It's a big modern museum. It's been there since the 60s. Well, they had a new one built, and the guy in the middle is Japanese, Ado. His last name is Ando. And they're all from Japan, of course. They are his assistants. So what happened, you might think, well, that exposure is sort of weird. What happened, I was shooting in another room, and I had my camera set for the light. And so when they walked in here, I saw this immediately. I didn't even look at my camera to see what was on, and I pulled it up and shot that. So some photographers on my staff said, you really messed up. Why is it so? Did you overexpose that? I said, no, not really. I sort of planned it. Not really. So my wife worked at the Modern Art Museum for 37 years. Yeah. And they hired me to come to all their openings and photographing all the artists with their show. And so I got to know them pretty well, actually. He was really famous. Oh, Ed Ruscha. That's one of his most famous paintings. I think Standard Oil back in the day paid millions for it, and it's called Amarilla. Good title, I guess. But so this is Ron Murik. His claim to fame was bringing these huge exhibits of people that are way out of proportion, and you can see that. Oh, I'm sorry. So everyone knows where North Park is. That's Raymond Nasher. The museum was closed on every Monday, and still is. So my wife called me and said, hey, Ray Nasher's here. He's getting a private tour. And she said, you ought to come over here. And so they let me stay with him, behind him. But out of all the images I shot, that was my best one. There's more picture to that. It's got squashed or something. I don't know why. Then I got into time-lapse photography. And that's a 3-minute exposure, if any photographers in here, at f/22. And I put it on a tripod. You can't do anything. You can't touch it. And that's what you get, because moving water will make that blur. And then my other thing was milkweeds, more still life. I went to the redwoods and photographed trees, and then people would buy them from me. The first book I mentioned was called Texas Women. And this lady, her husband, Richard, and I went on the radio, KRLD, and he helped promote the book, asking people to send in their Polaroids or anything if they wanted to be in the book. He got like 100 a week. And this lady, someone told me about, her husband owns a fleet of helicopters. He's in the oil business. And everyone could come up with their own idea. Her idea was hanging off of a helicopter with no safety. And my partner's we're both on the ground, I'm shooting. I said, Richard, she's getting a little high. He talks to the pilot, says, hey, can you bring her down some? And he just drops it like that. I said, not so fast. She was a good spirit. So Norm Hiskes is a dear friend. He retired from the ticket. It's the only photograph I shot since I retired. Gregory Curtis, former editor of Texas Monthly. In fact, I tried to get him to give me 25, 50 words to go in the book, and I could never reach him. So not everyone has a quote, but this is a good thing about my book, and I'm going to be selling them in the back of the room, very discounted. I'm sorry, what was I saying? I'm embarrassed.
You said every picture in the book.
Okay, Nolan Ryan, Jimmy Johnson, President Bush, asked him, Troy Aikman, I said, I would email him and I'll send him the 1 or 2 photos I was using. And I said, can you please write 50 words or 100 words, no matter what, and please tell me, what do you think of when you see this image? And man, Roger Staubach, he nailed it. I mean, they all did. Jimmy Johnson, Nolan Ryan. To me, it gives a little bit more insight into the subject. So in 1988, Burl Osborne, who's sitting in the middle, he was chief editor of the Morning News. He got an interview with Reagan on the day he was going to do the State of the Union speech. And so the White House photographer shot me there when I was very young. And Robert Deckert, our former CEO, he wrote my introduction to my book. And the newspaper was a really big supporter. And his tenure doing all this, he built 5 parks in downtown Dallas. Okay, there's Drew Pearson. See the number 88 up in the stands? You can barely see him. Now that's the Roger Staubach I know. He's jumping in Ron Springs' arms after throwing a touchdown pass to Tony Hill, and that put them into the playoffs. And found out later that was his last game. He was going to retire because of all the concussions. Tony Dorsett. I went to Korea, South Korea, to cover the Olympics. That's really one hard assignment to do. Nolan Ryan's 5,000th strikeout pitch, his signature, and he let me follow him, several days because he was nice, I guess. He liked me. Jimmy Johnson went swimming in the Dallas World Aquarium, and no one, is that Jimmy? I said, yeah, it's Jimmy. In fact, he has 2 fish in a tank because I think he likes fish more than football. Let me go back. So Troy Aikman writes about, where is it? Well, there's supposed to be 2 pictures. This was the second parade, 1994. The one before it had 350,000 people, and it almost turned into a riot. They were turning over cars, and it got out of hand. So the next year, when they won, they decided to do it like that. Jerry Jones being interviewed by Scott Pelley. So Jory told me, I sent him like 4 or 5 photos, and he's never asked me for a print like a lot of people. He goes, David, can you please make an 8x10 print of me and Jerry? I go, of course. He goes, well, it's one of my favorite pictures of me with Jerry. I would have never known. So does anyone remember Emmitt Smith? You know where I'm going with this. When he went missing up until he missed training camp in the first 2 games, holding out for more money. And this is one of Jerry's small planes. But I was doing a year-long story on Jerry Jones, and his secretary called me. Everybody was at Love Field waiting for him to come in. She called me. She says, David, can you leave that gang of people there and sneak out and come to DFW Airport, and I will call you back and tell you where to go. So Kenny Rogers getting a hug from his no-hitter. We moved his desk onto the baseball field, Tom Schieffer. We sort of wanted to recreate his office. Of all the times they have in their team photo one after winning the Stanley Cup, he's on a flip phone. And the photographer's trying to say, he didn't want to say, hey, Mr. Hicks, get off the phone. Well, we just waited. Norm Green, another high-profile cover. I had the idea of him standing still on the ice. I had to shoot this before a game. And, of course, I had like 3 minutes to do this. And so he knew where to stand. And then one of the coaches got the players to skate around him really fast. So I'm shooting off a tripod like at a third or fourth of a second to make the blur. So the Morning News produced a book on the Mavericks championship in 2011, and I didn't cover sports anymore, but I said, man, I got to do something here. So I was friends with Mark Cuban, and he's carrying the trophy down, and this image is in the book, and Dirk on top. Mark Cuban did what he loves to do with Mr. Stern yelling at him. So Mark Cuban allowed me to follow him the first year he bought the team. So I went to most of the games, but not every game, because the paper says, don't you have enough? And so that's his wife on the left, and his brother on the right, and his mother and dad are there. So this was a rodeo school down in Corsicana, and it's actually one of my favorite rodeo photos. This is a famous model, Jan Strippel. She posed for this photograph with these magazines. It took them 2 hours to put the magazines on her, and she couldn't move very much. And that was for DIFA, to raise money for the AIDS Project. So Mick Jagger came to town. He was at the Cotton Bowl. So I said, well, I got to do something different. When he got into the cherry picker, I went up in the stadium and shot down Ron White, and he doesn't drink anymore. Sissy Spacek, high-profile cover. Oh, wait, where am I going? Okay. This is the year I spent with Jerry Jones. He's dancing with the fake Elvis. He's fake. This is probably one of my favorite images of Jerry Jones. He's such a cheerleader in person, too, but he loves his team. And in the fourth quarter, back at the old stadium, he would come down through the stands and walk on the field and just walk back and forth. He loved being down there. Tom Landry, I covered him for 29 years. By the way, this was his last game, and no one knew it. But always shot them leaving, because you never know. And Coach Landry asked me to shoot his portrait for the cover of his book. And when he passed away, Southwestern Bell, when we had phone books, put it on the cover of the white pages. Does anyone here like golf? Does anyone know who these men are? Anyone? Okay, Byron Nelson on the right, Ben Hogan on the left. And my job was to get them to pose with their golf clubs and their hats. And then I shot it from the back, and they ran them both. But the back image, I auctioned these off for charity, and the set went for $4,000 one time, and people wanted to know, did you hear what they were talking about? I said, not really, but I know that they had respect for one another. Hogan was jealous of Mr. Nelson because he didn't win as many tournaments. A lot of fashion. Garth Brooks at the Texas Stadium. And this was off limits to everybody. Back in the day, you could not bring in a Walgreens film point and shoot camera. So once again, I was doing the story on Jerry, and I asked his secretary, hey, I need to go to the concert to cover Garth Brooks. She goes, go ahead, I'll make a call. You won't have any trouble. So my wife and I went up into Jerry's box that had a great view of this. And NBC was filming it for a two-night concert. Someone asked me about Moody Blues earlier. I was back in 1995. I went on tour with them. And that guitar is only this wide. You can see that. And my retouch person is amazing, Photoshop person. So we shot the band on a green backdrop, and she knocks it out. And that sort of became they don't have album covers anymore, but their lead image on their website. And I met Steve Miller in 1986 on assignment. I've been friends with him ever since. And I was very fortunate to have him write my introduction. So Steve supports Kids Rock. It's a foundation that helps kids from 7 to 17 or 18. And he would take some of them on tour when he was in California and he'd get them up there and play with him. He loved doing that. I wonder how many people here recognize any of these songs. They still play them on 92.5. And he loved this picture for some reason. Well, my wife shot that because I didn't have any pictures of me working with Steve, and it sort of filled the gap. So we'll go through these really quickly. Rosalind Carter, when she was First Lady. I went to the Super Bowl in New Orleans with a friend of mine. Yes, I did have a fro. And we processed our film in the visitors, one of the bathrooms in New Orleans. So we would load the film on these reels and do the thing that we've been doing for years. And then we actually put the film in the toilet to wash it. And we never told anyone that. So this is me with a stupid haircut in El Salvador. And this is the day I went to Washington to photograph Reagan, and that was his idea. And he had his photographer shoot that. I love politics more than anything else. I'd rather shoot politics, political stuff, more than going to a Cowboy game. I was in Richardson, not too far from here, of course, and I was covering a policeman's funeral. And we always stay our distance, and I don't like putting my camera in family's faces, so I got a 600 millimeter lens there. So this is my sad story ever. This is my son, Sergeant Jake Wu. I photographed him after he came back from boot camp, and this is in 2006. Unfortunately, he saw too much in Iraq, and he committed suicide. You never want to receive that phone call. And so they had us, National Cemetery in Houston, and my brother, who's a minister in Singapore, flew over to preside over his funeral. So I told you I have bookends. This is not like something I look forward to shoot. Cowboy cheerleaders, I could care less. But it's the only photo I have of the last day working that happened to be my bookends. And I needed Charlotte in it because she let me hang out with her the entire day. And I'm surprised. That's the best picture I got ever. Who figures? And my last day at work, it was May the 1st, 2018. Waving goodbye. And by the way, I looked at this image a year ago. Only one person in that whole, and there's people upstairs still work there. So anyway, does anyone have any questions? And thank you for having me. Hope I wasn't too boring.
Questions, comments, protests. This is the library. You can say what you want. Question for... I have a question to you. How'd you like those pictures?
Great, they're great. I'm just wondering
Thank
your most difficult assignment.
Being in Iraq with my son. The newspaper asked him to write a story about his experience being with his dad in a very, very dangerous situation. I mean, they were roadside bombs all the time. You did not know. So I just have faith in God that I would survive and pray for my son. But I'm told by the Pentagon, I'm the very first civilian, or not civilian, journalist, to ever go in a war zone with one of his kids. They just don't let that happen. thanks to President Bush for making it happen.
I'm just curious, like, how it works with, like, what kind of permission do you need to get from, like, a person before you run their photo in the newspaper? Like, especially, like, on the ones where you didn't get their name, did you have to get their permission, or were you allowed to?
No, if they're on the street, there's no law that can keep you, but I'm very polite. I would never, especially mom with kids and everything, they freak out. I guess I would be too. When I see something really nice happening, I just go up to them and tell them who I was, show them my badge, and said, do you mind if I photograph you or your kids playing? Every time, never got a no. And then I got their names and whatever, and guess what she said? She goes, oh, can you email me a photo? And not a print. So I did. But now I've been held by police for crossing a police line because I think I can do anything I want to do, but that's not always true. And I use my camera, like when I've been in all these war-torn countries, I sort of use it as a shield. Like, I'm not thinking about all this. I'm thinking about what's in front of me. I just block it. That's the only way you can do it.
Thank you.
Questions, comments, or protests? I have a question about your creative processes. I was impressed with how much time you put in, days of preparation, like the Pope in front of the Alamo. How did you come up with that idea?
Well, everyone knew that he was there to see the Alamo. Of course, he's not going to stop and go in, but he could have if he wanted to. He's the Pope. So, I don't know. Like if I'm going to like New York to photograph an executive and I might know his name and I know nothing about him, I'll go online and research him. And I write down his wife's name and where he went to college. So that's like when I walk into his office and I try to make it all about them and never about me. And that helps them relax. And I learned over the years, then eventually I can ask them to stand here or there, and they'd love to. But you got to win their trust no matter what.
I was impressed that you got Shannon Wynn to hang upside down. By the way, Shannon and his brother Angus, their father, built Six Flags Over Texas.
And everything else.
And everything else. And Shannon's been in the restaurant industry, and Angus has been in the music industry.
Right.
And by the way, you mentioned Hugh Ainsworth. We had him here about 7 years ago. You can find that video on YouTube of his presentation here. It was fantastic.
Yeah, it was.
And anybody else? Questions? Yes, I knew you had a question. You had that look.
So our question is, what inspired you to be a photographer? And how old were you when you knew that's what you wanted to do?
Well, not seriously at the time. When I was 11, I was really taken because I watched my dad a lot. And but then I worked for a photographer named Frank Cricchio. He was ranked in the top 5 portrait photographers in the country. And one summer, he let me work for him, even while I was in school. I went to school half a day and I went to work for him, some special program. So I learned a lot from him, but the best story with him, one day he said, hey, it's Friday night. Tomorrow's Friday night, football night. I want you to go to the local high school football game with me. I said, okay. He goes, but you got to wear my white jumpsuit. Think I'm like 17 years old. All my friends are in the stands. It looked sort of dorky, but it had Cricchio studio in the back. He says, I want you to help load my cameras when I run out of film. And then I'm going to give you a camera so you can shoot. You can go anywhere, but not on the field. and see if you can come back with some nice images. So we went back to the lab, processed the film. He was the only photographer that could shoot color to be separated and run in a newspaper. So the Port Arthur News, I mean, he volunteered to do this. So he picked one of my images over his, and it wasn't that good of an image. And I think he was really trying to help me, and he did. He gave me confidence. And so the next morning, my mom came in and knocked on my door. She goes, "David, get up. You need to come see the newspaper." Front page, and I saw my name, photo by David Wu, Port Arthur News. And I looked at it, I just stared at it, like, wow. That was the moment I said, this is what I want to do. Not about my name being in the paper, but, I mean, I've taken millions of images and how it's changed people's lives. I mean, that was the best part of my career, is sharing things with readers, but also, you know, it was just a wonderful time, actually. I would go on the cowboy trips, charters. This is a funny story, then we can say goodbye. The morning news, they had to pay like first class rate. So two writers would go, one photographer. So we're flying back from the New York Giants game. Of course, as soon as the game's over with, within an hour and a half, they're on the plane flying back. So they were getting really rowdy. I say they, Roger Staubach, Tony Dorsett, Randy White. So then you're not supposed to take photos on the plane if you're media. Well, I had this little Leica camera like my father's, but a newer one, and you can't hear it, you can barely see it. I had preset it when I saw the pillow fight, and I stood up and shot 3 or 4 photos, and I went back to my seat, and all of a sudden, the entire plane got very quiet. And I didn't know what happened. What did I do? I looked back, and this Coach Tom Landry, he's standing in the aisle doing this. He held that pose for like, I don't know, a minute or two. He did not move. He did not say a word. And then once it got really quiet, he went back and sat down. And by the way, you would never hear another word on that airplane trip back home. And we still had an hour to go. So anyway, thank you very much for having me.
David Wu, thank you.